Ready, Abba? Contextual one failed state of colonialism. The U.S. military pressure putting forced colonial stabilization. General discourse state failure presumes that African states are unique external stirring. It's Bachman. And 15. Western doctrine state for Julie radicalization. Military disaster persistent composition or integrated response political military activity. U.S. military activity. Label stability. U.S. military analytic encounter research taking in practice now more space. The analytical perspective policing. It's better to make the stabilization practices of Africa more comprehensive. African content presented a record condition for Julie vulnerability by security strategies where new idea stabilization can be tested. Africans parallel. Engagement governance covert actions deployments of 13 special operations force rallies normalization preventing military engagement aiming at fostering notion of good orders aid coercive the policing the ambition the desire to regulate all manner of heterogeneous things and activities, the policy of stabilization moves upon earlier attempts to integrate stability, military efforts, permanent conflict, and disorder in the global south. The stabilization agenda includes both containing and transforming element of space to fight against terrorist protection of local capacity. The constant stabilization links military objectives to domestic fragility during the Cold War foreign policy objectives, stability, general affairs, legitimacy, longevity, government, thus absent structural change for stability of both superpower safeguarding authoritarian regime sub-Saharan Africa, the U.S. military approach stability and paradigm holds external agent high spirit and all about society and perpetuate the narrative vulnerable political constant need of external steering. Next, the combined joint task force Greater Horn of Africa's laboratory for developing the discourse of global liberal governance. U.S. military presence normalizes the securitization of governance that deems illiberal space a threat to the global balance of power. This is Bachman. And 15 emphasis stabilization activity to be seen in constant asymmetric challenges counterinsurgency. U.S. military force shall be prepared to perform outside necessary to establish and maintain order. The encompassing definition of military task provides possibility U.S. military government under the conditions of safety and extensive involvement in external military units governance issues with no cities placed in Mexico ownership of these issues preventing greater external engagement in military fragile conflict policing functions precondition of maintaining global balance power to African continent problematize much security policy but abundant multiple chances that be emerged from government spaces have for the U.S. military become laboratory ideas and military preventing engagement system umbrella stability Africans expanding and engagement development surveillance counterterrorism military training maritime explorations of constant policing military and target African has potential for that has the greatest potential for addressing global instabilities in terms of interagency coordination and constantly be made laboratory nurturing government approach stability operations will be on African success can affect the military missions of other command groups and how they're organized the versatility practices of command joint task force one about to see more horizontal preventing the emerging engagement emerging CGCF HOA center the so-called direct poaching and addressing all root causes of potential radicalization Muslim youth in Eastern Africa civil affairs in implant 100 branches across Eastern Africa folks in Djibouti and northern coastal parts Kenya persistent activities use U.S. civil affairs in certain regions not only to perception U.S. military and primary source external funding by potential beneficiaries but contribute to stabilization of U.S. military role in local welfare issues. Next. The history of colonialism has been science colonialism produced a discourse with the field African state rooted in racialized hierarchies and neoliberalism. This is Jones. And 15. The immediate predecessor to failed discourse, not same South language development, modernization, wicked colonization, sort of legitimized practices of Western government supply policy advice, no difficulty helping decide central constitutions of colonialization, language development, and provide a mode of perception with science history, colonialism, production, golden qualified charting, global research by geopolitics, global authority, revolution discourse, state failure situated specifically, and the post-Cold War prospect of revolutionary alternative liberal capitalism, no longer possible original hierarchy positioning Africans beneath Americans, Europeans during time, these relations experiment by the Christian doctrine, colonial conquest of Africa to end in the 19th century was rendered legal through a numerous law constructed on the secular evolutionary ground civilization when the civilizations as kind of rendered according to ethnographic logic discourse state failure position logic the hierarchy gradation to criteria for identifying international hierarchy now formally interstate social forms kind of capacity to govern that's the unit ontology difference is situated move through humanity race civilization tribes and social forms of state the judgment capacity to govern no longer correlated according to racial civilization capacity maturity position new hierarchy the state capacity to govern as specified in the reference to universal notion of functional capacity of state and social vocabulary important academic possible literature describing diagnosis cross of state failure is dramatic in the historical etc discourse of racial anatomy record mechanism metaphor state something backwards time awards the abyss of collapse, tottering on the brink before decaying, collapsing, or imploding. Next. Racist structures United States military presence in Africa. One cannot understand presence without accounting for the colonial legacy and racist interventionist politics that structures its current political state. This is Jones. And 15 those racial structures the world Washington eliminating the mainstream discourse of race civilian structure and contemporary world politics and ideological ways prominent shade up. Concept of fragile state central contemporary policy discourse about global south, especially Africa state failure was given. And it's following the war on terrorism, unite understanding Africa the real condition. Language of the governance state failures comes to our time to help legitimize spectrum Western intervention with Africa and other non-West space for military activity. Especially the governance reform. The majority is criticism of failed beyond in person state failed state does remain abilities to shadow colonialism, so the voice has clearly delineated between articulation of imperialism and race and world system and intimate connection to democracy and the Western racial pressure for the rest of the past colonialism, the present and direction of the sideline and analyze state failure conditions of crisis contemporary Africa not being explained without examining the legacy of colonial effects and ongoing practices on international accumulation and French discourse of good government and state failure is irredeemably rooted in imperial and racialized imagination needs to recognize current ideas situated much longer genealogy of imperial discourse that grounds epistemological transformation produced from object and agree will not have been 19th century racial thought racialized thought it's not reducible to ideas by race based on biology concurrent imperialism produced racialized social orders racialization international law to use analytical methods that uphold ethnographic illusion association with the hermeneutics of race employed to produce race legitimized conquest slavery dispossession domination social routinization regulatory administrative power outside the European or non-European this was normal natural social arrangement. Next. Stability offered by liberal democratic systems comes at a price. They establish the conditions for long-term exploitation and genocide. The historical record of democratic interventions proves the reality of peacekeeping never lives up to its rhetoric. Richmond and resolved the development of the market for black selling commodity Middle Eastern Lebanon, Kosovo was needs more or less than test made through should evolution, so democratization, liberal reforms, marketization, comparative research, and getting little change in post-conflict and reforms and internalized Kosovo as an violence, regular current ethnic differences, based civil merge, and tomorrow's political problems of civil class liberal state in 2006. Backside much about the post-conflict policies failing to achieve the liberal standards a peaceful and consent being posed little regard for the addition of simplistic assumption about the transferability of technical social democratization can lead to genocidal violence, polarization occurring in Bosnia and Kosovo, the rule of law, and equity, privatization of the state, functions at the expense of the needy civil society, often subject to form shopping and instrumentalist project mentality rather than localized needs development, new liberal organization force, marginalized and needy, liberal framework become an agent of bare socioeconomic life because the city not can be internationally in the open market and not the resources to establish an economic base top-down project, one of my lines, liberal hegemonic actors, the post-conflict individual variety of reform, liberal precepts such as voting, paying taxes, engaging in a free market, and respecting rights in order to keep the international gaze satisfied, but not suspect this foreign security in way the foreign oil social which liberal epistemic community needs a peaceful and strengthening governance regimes through a process of training independency, freedom of more primitive recipients and conflict zones, process supported by the ideological enemy of contemporary forms of liberalism. Democratization shown really resulting in softening feudal core policy rather than radical reform. Local lease use institutional dynamics, liberal priest often own advantage by free riding and resources provided only by partially independent civilian local lease use to camouflage lack of reform. Next, colonialism is an unacceptable ethical violation is rooted in the eradication and genocide of entire population. Vote affirmative for a decolonial ethic. This is shite. And 7. Even with colonial project Leopold Belgian conquest professed benevolent goals of unanimously being civilized, being uncivilized, control of enabling most human life and potential colonialism, not being interpreted in violation, remains a violation or systematic eradication of ways. Thinking, speaking, being a colonialist violation remains reprehensible. Effects like the name of the being listed for justification violence. Colonialism operated on 2 levels. There is the violence between the colonized and colonized, and with the introduction of ethnic distinctions, violence between the native and the settler was institutionalized within the colonized population itself. Its efficient market is persistent colonial instances, contemporary political minds given the scale of colonial inspiration to good intention become exclusive overlook the only set of conquests and makes sense to situate genocide within the logic of colonialism. Comparable arguments made by the consolidation of Jewish and Arab identities in Palestine and Mediterranean generally thus. Abel and I affirm the United States federal government should significantly reduce its military presence from Camp Lemonnier. Framing questions. Contention 2, interconnectedness. Our critique of military presence discourse stability is a crucial contribution to decolonizing international relations. This is Davis and 11. Local practice movement in national government has been effective for altering the national global geography. Military action, American military can rely more heavily on colonial overseas territory, projecting military power to move beyond colonial spending only occurred in the escape, escalating pressure also enhance military ability to operate unilaterally without the consent of allied government. Not possible to understand the global geography of U.S. military without looking at local sites where our government apparatus such ground understanding the shift in military network scholars and silent listen to voices of government strategies and imperative scholars the eminent process particular scholars understanding cause emanating from other scales. Actual operation based have consequences for bodies and communities and environment chasing them and local opposition and jeopardize operation focus on colonialism to be expanded beyond the new American colonialism to include some rather continual banal colonialism have maintained the framework of American power and military based and training areas are key. Notes and number some sites in the place where apparatus military power touches the ground. Next, we should be analyzing the relationship between the plan and the advantages, not just plan along policy stories like the one institutional or particular understanding of both problems and solutions. Is sending and for in order to justify certain course of action knowledge reforms and component policy practice set factual causal claim normative principles and a desire to reflect which all constructed as a coherent story. A policy story when accepted at the social level would seem to define the terms of debate and through political energy performed through a policy story may become dominant policy field norm of central cognitive normative organizing device for specific formulation of establishment of policy. The knowledge that once formed part of an argument for policy is now an integral part. Next. Different advocacies affect implementation. Different advocacies affect implementation. Crawford and 2. Why is this thing not another found a constant argument is process of reason, the process and constant argument of fundamental forces in politics, the constant world politics found in particular beliefs and process policy shaped by the arguments because beliefs in everyday discourse and public political rhetoric, the process of argument and concept beliefs are institutionalized in the practices. Good. Alright. Yep.
What matters more, the material effect of the plan or the discourse used to justify it?
Or you would criticize that question and say that's a foolish question.
Why is it a foolish question? If the effect of the plan is more colonialism, why is the discourse that informs it important?
Right. We're saying that...
Does it not matter what the result of withdrawal from Djibouti looks like?
Right. Our argument is that the preceding question is how we learn to epistemologically discuss and interrogate the relationship between colonialism in terms of the fragile state, the failed state discourse.
I agree with you. So I agree with the prerequisite to withdrawal being...
Right, we're saying that like you're going to criticize withdrawal, right? We're going to say that's an incidental, like continued act of violence rather than need to look at the structural nature of violence colonialism and its assemblages.
The plan?
Excuse me?
How will the Department of Defense interpret the plan?
How will the DOD interpret the plan?
Yeah.
They
This seems sort of central to the characterization that they use, characterizations of failed states and stability. Why won't the DoD just spin the plan as, oh, we're removing our presence because it's causing overstretch in the SQUO. Removing it leads to better stability operations in the South China Sea, or something like that.
Right, because you're voting. But when you pass a plan, you're not just passing like the plan itself. You're passing a plan with its set of justifications. There's no like isolation.
I agree, but you've criticized the way hegemonic structures use discourse to justify their policies, particularly problematic ones in Djibouti. Why does
the discourses are, we're arguing that those discourses are the justifications for the plan. Yeah. We're saying that when you vote for the 1AC, you're not just voting for the plan, but the set of justifications aligned with it.
And how
right? If we were like, there's economic benefits for reducing military presence, then that argument makes sense.
You're misunderstanding the question. I understand that you're framing it one way, but how does that what changes after the plan
because
to prevent Ash Carter?
This is a debate about simulation, right? Like we're passing this through policy, and we're supposed to assume that we are policy makers in this situation.
We're supposed to assume that the Pentagon simply says, oh, our failed state discourse was what led to intervention in Djibouti. We're no longer going to do that.
No, we're supposed to assume that if you pass the plan, you're passing the plan with the justifications and not some other random ass justification that have nothing to do with what the 1AC presented.
Is military presence the only thing that structures rhetoric of failed states and stability?
Our argument was never that. Our argument was that the failed states discourse is what structures the military presence. You have the causal chain backwards.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. Is that the only thing that it justifies?
In our specific instance, we're going to say that yes, it does. That's what justifies the discourse. It's manifested off of racial terms and produced colonialism, which is an assemblage of different modalities of violence, which is why we need to challenge colonialism as a structure and condition.
Okay.
If you don't know what assemblages is, I can describe that for you right now, unless you're good.
That's fine. I got 20 seconds to the last question. The Buchanan evidence criticizes security. Is securitization always problematic?
Securitization of the state is always problematic, yes.
So what does that mean?
Like when we do things just in the interest of like American sovereignty, American governance, or trying to predict these sort of liberal reforms onto other countries, that is always problematic in every instance that the 1AC is describing.
Okay, yes. So wait, in every instance, even outside of the 1AC?
Can I get an example? So I don't know what you're talking about.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll get an example. Is that example gonna come now or later? Or?
Yeah. In the debate.
In the debate, or we'll see.
Actually, I'm gonna take prep. One more question. Why is withdrawal key? Why can't we just change the discourse that justifies?
Because we have a larger set of arguments about how the notion of counterinsurgent troops being there is a policing mechanism which has negative impacts on the population that is there.
Okay. 947.
It's 3 case.
I didn't even check my email.
Is it sent?
Yeah. Oh, you weren't on the email chain. Do you want me to add you?
Yes.
I have her email. Do you have her email?
Yeah, she's
Everyone's good?
How many offers?
3.
Yep.
First off, TV affirmed fails to specify what military presence reduce Nazi voting issue precision to classified proposal and effective policy analysis competent to military presence of U.S. military assets overseas theoretically true that military presence activities promote key security objectives. Having no are they more cost effective way for the removal of security objectives through the current mix of presence of military other military and non-military instruments of influence to address this question systematically. We must define what are we discussing more precisely. What is U.S. presence? Reduce is the net decrease or net decrease. Public law 87 reduction net decrease not offset by summation any other action. It means throughout words and phrases. It means throughout the That means the plan must explicitly preclude interregional transfer in Kentucky. Court of Appeals 84 by the word reduce the statute invested vehicle if a person transferred the classification change but not reduced the greater Horn of Africa refers to the landmass of 8 countries. Friday 14, the horn-shaped area that protects the Indian Ocean from the landmass in East Africa, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, the Sudanese republics, Uganda, and the greater Horn of Africa. Violation. The plan does not mandate removal from the region, but neg 1 ground mandated removal is essential for predictable disestablishing counterplan competition. Otherwise, app determines troop endpoints in response to 1 and C. Also forces us to win solvency approved T2 precision. We chose regions instead of countries. That models military doctrine 715. The U.S. military sees the world divided into regions labeled under a particular commanding unit. Next off is the disad unique link. Allies are cautious post-Iran deal, which also slap in the face that causes proliferation. OSPAR 715. Washington's accused to rule the very problem in the region Gulf for last year for 5 decades ago. However, their trust is when GCC's mistrust to mention the effectiveness of systemic nuclear proliferation spectators by GCC in support of the deal. The trade leaders that the deal will not curb Iran's nuclear ambition. The Gulf Arab states as we reach parity with Iran. The GCC feels cannot compete with Iran. Regional influence with some missile capabilities in nuclear arena. At present, there's no place to be willing to take this risk. Saudi Arabia remains a wild card for nuclear proliferation. Riyadh's calculation pursuing nuclear program capability to its perception of Iran influence, and Saudi Arabia lost the cable to counter that influence and proceed the U.S. and London southern right pursuing nuclear program. U.S. provide assurance remains central to GCC deterrence and key to preventing nuclear proliferation. More becomes focus through U.S. assurance efforts in response to a deal. Posture after the Iran deal determines whether or not it's effective. Withdrawing now realized aggression and collapses allied assurances. Pollack 85. How the deal would impact the Middle East would have less to do with contra JCPOA than how would the U.S. behave towards region awakening the agreement. The narrative selected cause Iran suddenly being destructive policy of the region. What can cause Iran to change behavior from the policy of the U.S. pursued the U.S. JCPOA would further disengage to highly active Iran become more expensive, aggressive, believing that the U.S. no longer has the will to stop it. The U.S. reacts by stepping up its engagement, providing a meaningful churches to Gulf allies to protecting their security interests and pushing back harder Iran, particularly in Syria. Then it's very likely that Iranians respond by backing down the U.S. master of its own fate. Iran has the highest execution per capita rate in the world. Thousands executed for simple drug charges and homosexuality, and they have all intention to pursue nuclear weapons to target the U.S. Shadow 15. Iran executed 64 non-citizens first weekends of January. Iran reported 1,000 deaths, which will shadow last year's record. The regime started 2015 off then executing 15 individuals, including 4 women. The majority are executing simple drug charges. Other crimes such as being as a homosexual are also punishable by death. 4,000 blood cases have been executed by Iran. Public execution conducted. The victim is hung in the air off Ukraine. Iran has continued to rapidly develop nuclear weapons. Tehran was acting to help the Syrian Assad regime. Tehran may have the capability to hit the U.S. Pro-left collapse of the NPT causes nuclear war and turns terrorism element. 1. Saudi proliferation can accelerate throughout the region. Pakistan still operational weapons and delivery system can provide the infrastructure, material, and technical support to produce weapons within a matter of years. These Saudi nuclear weapons would increase the standard of the nation ability to receive nuclear weapons. Each state weakens the non-proliferation regime. Interaction would be more prone to moves, calculation, escalation than a bipolar competition, multipolar system, less stable, emerging parts from to take steps that should avoid nuclear change given the close proximity states very short flight times. Nuclear powers being built long-term warming. The government may also delegate large authority handling the possibility of miscalculation on certainty would trigger nuclear war. The government may lose control of the weapons to attack or theft. Next off is the counterplan.
You forgot to grab the counterplan.
Text. The United States should shift and retrofit all Camp Lemonnier operations and forces to conduct demining operations. The United States should announce that it's abandoning all other missions. The region will be focused solely on demining. The counterplan competes demining our U.S. military operations, a function of the U.S. military. Blanchard 8. U.S. military in Africa conducts a variety of activities to support the U.S. national interest. Operational activities include humanitarian relief, peacekeeping, counter-narcotic sanctions, enforcement, demining, non-combat evacuations, and maritime interdiction operations. Reduce means to administer to a smaller number. Oxford Dictionary and English Dictionary. Ignite reduce to begin to administer smaller number. Landmines are a huge cause of structural violence in the Horn of Africa. Component 6. The landmines serious problem that has a permanent impact on healthy economy and environment. Weapons have been scattered in fields around schools and health centers. Buildings to prevent people from using lands to block water. Landmines cause village marches, close people starve to death. They disabled hard and African countries have been infested by landmines. This intensifies the effects of drought and cause of famine. Troops at Lebanon is key to demining, which all collapses ability to conduct operations. Riley and Jones 15. Djibouti emerging critical stage in promoting stability in East Africa and supporting operating U.S. to up to its commitment to Djibouti with 10-year lease of the Lebanon Invasion transmitted throughout the East Africa with types of capacity in the for national distribution, security, defecting, and defusing, provides a close advice of military service to help a U.S. operation here to perform demining humanitarian mission. Collaborative will be played by the U.S. and Djibouti depends the kind of project that are now required. Landmines are structural violence, kill more than all WOD combined. Demining is ongoing, but as long as mines are available, the harm will continue. Tepe 11. Landmines kill more people than nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons combined. Near 26,000 people wouldn't even kill vending victims, not including any data. Landmines campaign decided that they were free to deal with 100 million rounds. No accurate data exists. They're not just outside the problem. Explosive devices cause life, free and installation, physical harm, mass cause emotional harm, agricultural living space remain mines, and therefore leave civilians unable to return to their routines. Demanding is time consuming. Case. Military presence is not the only way we create a failed state trope. The EU, UN military presence, CNN, media representation, debt relief prove that they don't overcome this. None of their evidence assumes the media spin. DoD will reinterpret their discourse to be one about overstretch and stability makes an impact inevitable. Funding and personnel are finite. Drones get shifted to China and Russia after the Apple door. 817, the Pentagon's planning to increase use of drones, using the Army to put more of the unmanned aircraft in the air. 60 patrol drone codes and new advanced plane 12, 407 used to target terrorists. Those needs to be shifted in China's years. China's program subject to see and prompt great demand depending on leaders take this challenge into account as they drones will be used across the Europe and specifically they need it's not going to be the key answer question how the panel will pay for additional patrols and counter-terrorism operations in Africa causes war crimes and Zeko 14 goes China's potential miscalculation military escalation case in 430 bilateral maritime areas in the east and China states sees conflict over disputed waters will only increase if the country deploy drones in that area. PMCs fill in security vacuums created by reduced presence ensures war because they have a monetary standard to create conflict. Send 15 these private armies go search to be caused of use to rather than behind security vacuum that's being filled by private security contractors. Some are protecting international shipping in Africa and the United States wants global presence contracts not going away after the Cold War ended their security vacuum around the world inside companies like the Executive Vacuum South Africa once you should the secure vacuum a lot of the NGOs are going to need security to be boom type of contractors there. I'm going to places like Africa positive money organization there set by the long game Spain conflict they don't want to work themselves out of job mercenaries will pay more war increasing PFCs causes cycles of escalating violence and humanitarian human rights abuses. Hughes 12 they're now increasing militarization sees greater militarization leads to escalated violence and human rights abuses which all leads to military actually their criticism withdrawal of the Joint Task Force and the attendant discourse surrounding stability and democracy promotion fails. There are instances of so-called security threats and military presence that the U.S. will use to justify more interior forms of colonialism. Their critique and material action does nothing to reshape American foreign perception of African state stability. Plot 8. Social scientists spend periods of the humanities representing knowledge what scientists see from their arbitrary smiles away to practical logistics and acting together might be appeared to be result of rational habits may well derive from practical hunches while social scientists have necessary time to rationalize action post-application to reflect practical problems they must urgently resolve. 1. In order to do practice of execution theoretical model action not perceived by being made of desire to practice can be oriented towards a goal without being constantly informed it nowhere as these interpretations are for properly theorizing practical knowledge by its very small distinct point postmodern epistemically representational bias detached from an effective to the social urgency practices many postmodern intellectualized discourse point of discourse practical logic and meaning and the common knowledge tool asserts that serious practice when restricting exposure to discourse and also evacuates practical logic that makes securitizing discourse possible taking practice turn helps to overcome the representational bias in our theory whether rationalist constructiveness or postmodernist they are imperialist anti-imperialism you should evaluate the unintended effects of their plan. Petros 11. Anti-imperialist rhetoric smooth media mass speed militarist mobilize Western public opinion the leftist critics behind the paragraphs historic rhetoric of imperialists promote anti-imperialism grassroots moves uniformly negative US back to representing Eastern Europe change Russian for US domination Eastern Europe countries have become even more subservient under the US and EU under Russia leftists fell in love with imperialism promoting anti-imperialism led to the creation of NATO bases in which white leaders created support for the imperial promoted liberation of Eastern Europe devastated welfare state programs of the tail end of the imperial backward research movements in the name of anti-imperialism have never engaged any critical reflection no effort to analyze long-term negative consequences of their position long history of imperialist manipulation of anti-imperialist narratives is found expression in the present day colonialism becomes a convenient alibi to overlook internal responsibilities. ATA 10. Externalists attribute to Africa's well-shared disciplines of the slew most African leaders, scholars, and intellectual writers, externalist position elsewhere to cause every African problem as external factors set to Western colonialism and imperialism. Almost every African Middle Age was described as receive external ages, internalism, new any angry generation of Africans who were fed up with African leaders who refused to take responsibility and instead use colonialism as convenient alibis to continue their own copy management while external factors played a role in internal factors more significant causing Africa's crisis. African condition is emergently worse by internal factors. Cuban leaders seem to mention colonialism by motivating them. They always said internal factors. Rebel leaders has been driven by internal grievances. Reality is independent of discourse, nuts in 1. The emphasis on the subjectives misleading conception of threat, and that is independent and whatever is perceived a threat, misperception, not clear, simultaneously large number of politicians hardly most of the time have been dealt with both in terms of obsession in terms of phenomenon which they are perceived to be threatening the phenomenal threats to reduce the amount of pure domestic politics, discounting objective aspect threats to security to incident asserts what has been threat to perception importance the IRS implication that urgent action may be required.
On the externalization argument, it indicates that the problem is with African leaders who refuse to take responsibility. What the hell does that have to do with us criticizing the United States notions of colonialism?
You have made the argument that colonialism structures the failed state trope. Our argument is that attempts to get rid of colonialism and focus on colonialism becomes reappropriated
right, it
by
speaks about
politicians.
Alright, listen to my question. It talks about it specifically in the context of African leaders using that to escape the problems that are happening in their own specific countries. What does that do with us addressing colonialism in the United States context?
It deflects blame onto U.S. colonialism. Our evidence indicates that people within Africa don't want you to do that because it deflects the responsibility from African leaders and corrupt leaders within Africa.
The people in Africa don't want us to criticize colonialism.
They say that a focus on U.S. colonialism obfuscates the responsibility of their corrupt leaders.
Right. It talks about externalists. Where does it say that we should not focus on colonialism in the warrant of the card, though?
Yeah, the externalist claim is exactly what you said. I focused on colonialism in the U.S. As
All right,
externalization of
let's go to the
colonialism
Petros argument. You say imperialist, anti-imperialism. What are the unintended consequences that we should be looking at?
So one are shift arguments. Two, the Petros evidence gives the example of how when the U.S. backs anti-imperialist grassroots movements, those movements don't imagine the unintended negative consequences that they can.
All right, let's talk about the shift argument. How many troops are necessary for there not to be the shift impacts?
How many troops are necessary?
Yeah, what is your byline between like a substantial decrease?
Well,
Like
I think this is why our spec arg is important, but
it's also a linear argument.
Yeah, it's also linear.
How many troops need to be there in order for the in order for the shift not to occur?
I mean, the counterplan would not lead to this shift.
That doesn't. I feel like that doesn't answer the question.
No, it's a linear argument, i.e., like
the more we leave, the more
withdraw. Yeah.
The more necessity there is to a shift to maintain the original posture.
Okay, your China argument indicates that in the ununderlined, the decision to add Army and civilian operated missions to the mix was triggered because the Air Force, which has been running about 65 combat air patrol missions a day, asked to decrease that number to 60 because of stress on the force. How is this card applicable to the 1AC? Like, who changes this? It seems like
So the part you were talking about was referring to the Air Force's need for drones because they're tired of putting actual people in planes.
Yeah.
The plan resolves that increased demand for drones because freeing up Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti has a bunch of drones. Those would get shifted to China.
So there aren't other drones already in. Okay, let's go to the Gulf DA. I feel like the Iran DA has a lot to do about like the Persian Gulf. Where does it ever analyze anything about Africa at all?
Our link is very specific to why Djibouti is a specific site as to why the GCC states look for the U.S. assurances.
Which card is that?
We use Djibouti to do
Which card is that?
It's the Rosen card, I believe.
That says Djibouti key?
Yep.
Okay.
Djibouti is where we conduct drone strikes in the Yemen against the Houthis, which are Iran's proxy.
Alright, I'll take that. take evidence that colonialism is the worst impact in the ground and continues a perpetual genocide against racialized bodies, which inevitably results in the extinction of the black body in Africa. Now, go to the line first. They say the media reps and the DOD arguments first. They can see the sending evidence from the 1EC that says that when we define the terms of the debate at the discursive level, that changes the way that policy is implemented, and we create actual policy stories, and the way that these policy stories are interpreted is the way that they're justified, which means that we would inevitably spill over to the way that the media represents current failed states, but also we have an outweighing claim. The way that the government represents certain countries outweighs the way the media represents countries. Only the U.S. Because the U.S. has control over the military, and that is how we justify our intervention into failed states in the first place. The DOD interpretation argument doesn't make sense. DODs would be part of the plan. They would be part of the and analyzing justification for the plan. The Jones evidence also said that we disrupt academic knowledge production, which means that we would change the terms of the debate by dismantling failed state discourse. Now, the shift argument versus framing issue on any shift terms versus A, they all assume that there's a high propensity for intervention in the status quo. That is why current military presence sustains the need for intervention. Its uniqueness for our criticism. Now, B's point is this is why the plan is care. Withdrawal signals a broader change in interventionary strategy. Specifically, Djibouti is the laboratory for exporting violence. So when that domino falls, we create a ripple effect in IR. Now, CSR decolonial ethics solves questions of reintervention or any shift. We disrupt dominant academic discourse that reproduces failed state logic that justifies intervention. Colonialism is the systematic eradication of ways of thinking. The app breaks free of that by interrogating the way it produces knowledge. Now, the specificity debate, the China debate, their evidence uniquely says that we're already increasing drones now in the status quo. The plan does nothing to change it, which means the impact's notable. Only the app can resolve the way that we deploy drones in the first place by preventing that, because there's no legitimate reason to give into drones if we don't have any to intervene. Now, the PMC's debate challenging the colonial reality of intervention means that we contest the very premise of PMC felon. We eliminate the base, we eliminate the presence in Africa. Decolonial ethic exposes the fallacy of intervention. Now, the U.S. doesn't hire PMCs to do missions without the support of the military. They supplement missions. Even if they were in Africa, they can't do state building on their own. Now, also, we are a coin strategy. There would be no villain because PMCs can't fulfill the role of counterinsurgency troops. Also, not unique. There's already violence and instability in Africa because of U.S. presence. Also, crossed by the decolonial ethic means we resolve PMC fill-in. Now, they say we don't change policy, but first, security is bad, justifies needless, and violent intervention in regions deemed incapable of governance. This produces the worst forms of exploitation because it assumes that external nations have better knowledge about the inner workings of nations. That is the Bachmann evidence. Second, it holds a policing apparatus. Even in peacetime context, countries are still monitored to ensure long-term stability. That's the second piece of Bachmann evidence. Now, predictions have been used to justify intervention and expand the imperialist state. They ignore the historical trauma of colonialism by focusing on the present. Not only the affirmative is able to shape that policy by A, is disrupting academia, B, is the material implications of our policy, which is military withdrawal, and both those in combo change the way that dominant IR functions by disrupting that knowledge production and also delegitimizing interventionary politics. Now, the imperialism critique versus one, their card is literally about how the military helps minority groups in their formation of anti-imperialism movements. That is not the app. Yes, it would be imperialist to use the military to support anti-imperial movements. The app withdraws, so it's not as, also we have specific contextualized evidence about why our critique of imperialism is uniquely bad in the way that it's been used to justify intervention in Africa, which has only produced exploitation of racialized bodies. Now, they say colonialism is an alibi. It's only an alibi in the context of failed states, using how we use failed states to justify interventionary exploitation. This is why we implement troops during peacetime. This is what the alibi is. And second, even if this argument is true, it is not a justification for U.S. intervention. If other countries are corrupt, that is not a reason why the U.S. needs to stay there. This is the logic of the failed state rhetoric, is the U.S. needs some sort of justification to maintain a foothold in the region. They say reality does not shape discourse. It could cross by the sending evidence that I extended from above. If we get to define the terms at the discursive level, that is how we create policy stories. And the second piece of evidence, the Crawford evidence, is the way we talk about certain discussions affects their implementation. This is also going to be a solvency deficit to the comp plan because they have not provided an ethical reason for why you should vote for the comp plan. We defend reduction of military presence in the greater part of Africa. Cross-sex checks. You could have asked what military presence we reduce. We reduce any military presence in Camp Lemonnier. That includes troops and their military functions. There's also no distinction between the civil and military divide, which means anything that is considered policing would be removed from the plan. Now, counter-interpretation reduce implicates permanency. That's Mon C-5090 plan. Dictionary meaning of the word to diminish lower degrade word to reduce means seems adequately to indicate permanency. Now, counter-interpretation Lemonnier is the only permanent U.S. military base in Africa. This block in 11, the Lemonnier provides the U.S. military's only enduring infrastructure in Africa. Also, our critique by nature precludes intra-regional transport because we think military presence is bad. They still get their ground based off of general reduction. Military presence that outweighs their limits. This interpretation kills AF ground because it makes obscure offset count plans competitive. The NEC can pick any mission and then the AF would have to defend. It kills clash because we can't generate offense. Also, Djibouti is the centerpiece of U.S. military presence in Africa. Our reduction is the indicative of the broader region region and is best for debate because it gives the best ground. Also limits other countries have fewer than 100 troops on the ground. Reduction in Djibouti's key to predictable limits on the topic. Default reasonability. We decrease the number of troops in the region on our critique. Pre and free deployment arguments. Now, the in debate in means under the law are based on the law of Black Laws Dictionary. Based on the law, we made our counterpation. We reduce presence in Djibouti under the law and province of Djibouti. There's no law of the Greater Horn of Africa. Iran said. The notion of instability in the region in the Persian Gulf is a direct result of U.S. characterization of alien countries as failed states that require intervention. The discourse inevitably re-entrenches instability and maintains the anti-ethical complex of intervention. Now, there's no link. Either A, the link evidence in the context of Middle East force posture in Djibouti does not have an effect on how Iran views us. He even concedes in cross-text that the card is not about Djibouti. It's just about any drone strikes, which means anything that we're doing in the Persian Gulf would freak Iran out. Now, B is we don't remove presence from the Persian Gulf, which means there is sufficient deterrent against Iran. Now, these tripwire arguments are what we critique. The U.S. tries to retain a foothold in the region in order to manage and stabilize the region. Now, the impacts of Iran's punishments of its citizens are not implicated by whether or not the U.S. changes posture. Now, the discourse of Iran pro-life control uses the narrative of discipline and punishment grounded in colonial exploitation. That's Dalby, and I'm looking at America's political religion with Tehran. This isn't so much evangelism of the master narrative of authoritarian pedagogy. It's a matter of discipline and punishment insistence that Tehran submit to American dictates and nuclear matters of shame and sunning. The sanctions regime is backed by reported threats to for the Iran child abandon its stubborn refusal to adjust its behavior and submit to American authorities. Offers will presuppose American preeminence. Iranian national pride refuses to accept such attempts to discipline, and now Western non-prolific discourse delegitimizes any alternative perspective. Their system of understanding cannot incorporate ethical treatment of otherness. That's still true in 5. The U.S. and Western non-prolific security literatures are not sensitive to alternative viewpoints that the third world may acquire nuclear weapons for legitimate reasons. The Western non-proliferation literature is based on nuclear and WMD non-proliferation studies become a subset of counter-proliferation, anti-proliferation analysis because the Western security community contends that it's both strategically dangerous and morally unacceptable for the third world states to possess nuclear weapons. Whether capabilities are ethically or morally equivalent is irrelevant to the realism universe where power capabilities define what is right and what is wrong with the card there. And it's also their impact is just empirically designed. Iran has been trying to procure or has nuclear weapons for years but has never attacked the U.S. Counterpoint. Peacekeeping never lives up to its rhetoric. That's the Richmond evidence. They pose the question of how can we justify U.S. presence. We critique that very question. Counterpoint doesn't solve the off, ratcheting down the number of operations to 1. Peacekeeping off does not disrupt the liberal peace versus the mere presence. Just add presence. Present troops will continue to walk around with their guns and uniforms, maintaining the policing apparatus in Djibouti. That's the Balkan evidence. Second is the backdoors this out. If a crisis disrupts, the military must be reactionary and send more troops without disrupting the ideology of intervention. The counterplan results in constant intervention and militarization of Djibouti presence. 3 is dependency. Presence creates policing, uniquely displaces domestic ownership over state issues. That's Bachman. This creates an unhealthy dependency where the U.S. becomes Djibouti's crutch indefinitely. Now, double bind. Either A, permutation to both. The counterplan is legitimate retasking that they're not competitive because the presence is not military anymore and a consistent extension of the plan, or they are still military presence, which means all of our policing and unethicality arguments still apply. Now, retasking the military for demining maintains the power of failed state discourse as human security. That's Boswell and Hickney 07. The argument that national security should be replaced by human security does nothing, while countries argue that security should be human rather than state health should specify the human category. Human is strongly attached to the idea of human rights that can be used to frame practice moral and universal terms into a globalized world becomes enunciated, demonstrated by through nation foreign policy which seeks to protect humans abroad by supporting demining activities. Disarming illegal combatants. Foreign policy has been presented serving universal and deeply embedded in the ethico-moral discourse. Cut the card at discourse. Now, permutation to the plan and train the troops and then leave. No reason why they need to stay indefinitely. Now, the counterplan is another form of white guilt. They create constant reintervention because the U.S. wants to remedy its colonial legacy. Instead, it becomes a cover for continued presence and violence in Africa. Crossed by the Crawford evidence, different advocacies affect implementation. They have no ethical defense of why the counterplan is good. Now, the counterplan is a political cover for imperialism. Debinding and demobilization are standard elements of failed state narratives that shell us in 9. Most actors have focused on failed states. The getting to pieces so has understood including 3 sets of task. Security transition involves disarming and demobilizing combatants, facilitating the return of refugees and internally displaced persons. The managerial and performance in nature focus on the macro level actions such as design, conduct, and outcome of specific operations. Second, approach peace building in the context of the international system questions the legitimacy of the enterprise. Peace building that has progressive rhetorical cover but is in fact a tool of right control or even neo-imperialism designed to recolonize regions of the South.
Which ad in the 1AC makes the claim that Fox News would change how they employ the failed state trope in the context of Djibouti?
We don't have any evidence that talks about Fox News specifically. Our Jones evidence says that we interrupt the way that knowledge is produced.
In the academy.
In the academy, yes.
Okay,
and who interprets this literature? If people aren't writing about failed states, they're not going to talk about it.
My next question is, when has the DoD looked to academic scholarship to formulate a policy?
They're the ones that write about what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, so do you think all colonial scholarship is the same? Do you think military databases are not categorically different from decolonizing IR?
Well, yeah, That's true, but the
Okay,
second
so then
argument
which
I
F-
made is that the
Which
DoD
F
would
have
be
you read that says
included
that
in
the
the
DoD would look to your form of decolonial IR
The
scholarship?
argument that we're making is that the DoD is involved in the political process of the plan. If we provide justifications for policy implementation, the DoD would
Yeah, I
obviously
guess my
be there
question
in
is,
understanding why that
Do you
policy
seriously
exists.
think that language is so static that the plan will never be reframed ever
We
by
don't
the
think
DoD?
the language is static. We think we can
Alright,
change it.
Cool. What's your uniqueness arc for the shifty A's?
All of
why
your
is it-
evidence says that all of this shit is happening now.
Yeah,
You know, and it's happening now because military
Alright,
presence
cool.
is
I
there.
guess my question is, do we have drones in South China Sea?
The card says we are increasing drones
Yeah.
to the China Sea.
No, the
because
card does not say that.
Yes, it
the
does.
1AC
It says
process
that-
pointed that out, and I clearly explained why it did say that.
why it didn't say
Talk
that.
about PMCs though. Are there PMCs
The Pentagon
in
is
Djibouti?
planning to
No,
increase
I'm
its
talking
use
about
of
something
drones
else
using
now.
the.
Are there PMCs in Djibouti?
Are there PMCs in Djibouti?
Yep.
No, I
Alright,
don't
cool.
know.
So then why is it the turn unique?
The turn isn't unique because there would be no troop presence there, and
Um,
PMCs are used to supplement
Alright,
troop
my
presence,
next
and they
question.
would not
Alright, my next question.
fill in.
Alright, yeah. So we'll read. I have on PMC's independence, but
Can't
next
wait.
F says you're on topicality. Do you seriously think so? Somalia, no counter piracy operations. Eritrea, our agreement with Addis Ababa about a military base and drone flights. Why do those things count as military presence outside of Djibouti?
Why is that a relevant question?
You've made the argument that we reduce from the region because Djibouti is the only place where we have military
Where
installations.
the argument
I
is
just
that
gave you other
Djibouti is the
examples.
most enduring and significant presence in Africa.
I guess-
The second argument is we have better limits because those troops stationed
Yeah,
in
but
Somalia are less than 100.
This wasn't T significant. This was just
Yes, I
T you have to
understand.
mandate out of the region. So why is Djibouti being an enduring form of presence meet that?
Wait, what's the question?
You
Where
said
in the plan
mandate the
text does
entire
it mandate
region.
outside of the region?
You said mandate the region. That was the
No,
interpretation.
mandate reduced from the region. It precludes
Right, mandate
interregion
reduced from
Yeah.
the region. If there's only one
But
military
the
base in the
we read
region.
a
But
card
I
that
just
says-
gave you other
Right,
military
hold up.
bases.
We read a card that says reduce inevitably implicates permanency, so we preclude intra-regional transfer.
Permanency from where the plan text mandates, which is Djibouti.
Permanency as in reduction in Djibouti would be permanent withdrawal.
much is left?
5. T counterplan case.
T counterplane case.
Yeah. I'm good.
Topicality, I'm not going to go for the spec argument, but they kind of botched the T in the plan must mandate a withdrawal from the entire region reduces and that decreases to me. It must explicitly preclude interregional transfer. The word in modifies the region. So a topical act must mandate a reduction from the Greater Horn of Africa. Can't just mandate a withdrawal from Djibouti. Withdrawing from Djibouti alone does not ensure that the presence removed from one country leaves the entire region. That links to all of our core coordinate ground arguments like area of responsibility. This adds they can no link by moving troops closer closer to the area of responsibility, or the area where the area where the conflict is occurring, which makes topic bidirectional independently directs competition for regional shift counterplans, which are key to check small apps that don't justify withdrawal from the region. The topic is already huge, multiplied by every possible intra-regional bedroom to the bathroom. It does not reduce. It's not a reduction from your house, even though you made a reduction from your bedroom. Precision outweighs it guides all research. They force down a grammatical reading of the resolution to determine negative ground. If there's any reading of the second is grammatical precision. If I say reduce trash in your home and you move it from your reduction from the Greater Horn of Africa, you should vote negative. The app has a competitive incentive to reinterpret the plan text based on one-to-see strategy, even if it doesn't happen in this round. It happens in every other policy debate. Imagine the Greater Horn of Africa app where you can withdraw from Djibouti and then shift all the presence to Somalia, which solves this topical version of the app solves your app. All you have to do is add Greater Horn of Africa at the end of the plan text and mandate the withdrawal. They say we meet because the plan is any military presence that only enters our spec argument, not the T argument. I'm going to go for they say counterplan reduce means permanency. Yes, we agree with you. Permanency must be applied to the region, not to the country within the region. Obviously, withdrawal from the region doesn't necessarily that it goes out. The only response is that Lemonier is the only base in the region. This is not true. Presence gets shifted. Somalia, Kelly, in 15. Many of 6 U.S. drone strikes have represented a shift in U.S. military operations in Somalia in the context of a growing U.S. military presence in the ground on Somalia. They say that their criticism solves any sort of shift argument. This proves that we have to debate solvency in order to win topicality, which is fundamentally the whole point of topicality. We shouldn't have to debate the case, which puts us back on square one. They say it destroys Africa because of substance counterplans. Offsets counterplans are key to check necessity from the region, necessity withdrawal from the region, which solves the app, which is a reasonable cap on an already large topic. Even if it's not, you can reject the offsets counterplan if they're abusive in particular scenarios. They say Djibouti is key. This is not applicable because you can still withdraw from Djibouti, or organizations simply that Djibouti withdrawal has to result in a withdrawal from the region. Reasonability is arbitrary and self-serving. It's ultimately subjective because what's reasonable for one judge isn't reasonable for another, which least subjectivity takes debate out of the debater's hands. Competing interprets the only objective way to evaluate T. Counterplan. The counterplan solves the case because it ends aggressive military presence in the region and shifts it to demining, which results in a worse form of structural violence. Mines cause thousands of people die from radiation and poisoning. It puts people out of their livelihoods. There is a massive structural violence attached to voting affirmative that only the counterplan resolves. Landmines kill thousands of African women, children, and men every year. They perpetuate famine through agriculture because agriculture is impossible with high concentration of mines. This ensures that a region remains unstable. They leave victims with psychological injuries. Amputees experience phantom limb pain and lack of medical care. Means the wounds go untreated. Landmines have killed more people than all biological nuclear weapons combined. That's the evidence. U.S. presence does have a long history of colonialism, but the counterplan, we endorse the historical method. The one you see, we are attentive to the overall hierarchical systems of oppression. The counterplan is a necessary tool for bringing about global environmental justice. Most of the colonialism in East Africa is caused by other countries like Italy, the UK, and France, and other historical forces. However, most of the mines specifically are contributed by the United States, maintaining a presence through repositioning our presence as a part of a larger revolutionary practice that deconstructs
obstructs the system of colonialism. It demands a destruction of the way that the United States allows to treat Djibouti as a black hole where we can dump mine waste. The counterplan also critiques failed state source discourse as a justification for aggressive military policing in the region. It critiques destabilization rhetoric, which means that the rest of the military bad arguments don't respond to the counterplan because it doesn't lead to endless intervention. It also flips the notion of a failed state, which means that even if you are generally skeptical of humanitarianism in the abstract, you should be especially use it in this instance of particular heinous crimes such as mines. This is offense. We solve your failed state discourse better than you do. They don't have a monopoly on how the media and the academy interpret and redeploy the plan. Fox News will report that withdrawal was done for strategic purposes, such as Djibouti's situation being too intractable to help, that our mission failed. The plan would be spun to protect U.S. troops like those who are drugging Mogadishu and Somalia, or that we are being overstretched in Djibouti, so we have to leave to other places, which is why the military would spin the plan as an attempt at military readiness. They say the counterplan obfuscates U.S. colonialism. No, the counterplan obviously says the U.S. is implicated in mines and that we have to remedy its necessary reparative justice, assuming that the U.S. can never do anything good for close to possibility of reparations, which can be a good necessary thing for social justice, in the same way that saying a thief should pay back the money doesn't endorse a thief. Will explicitly concede their Davis evidence from the 1AC. It says that the justifications for policies frame the material outcomes. This is why in cross-examination I was like, what matters more, the effects of discourse you use? This frames the way you evaluate the counterplans are necessarily good, which means that it doesn't lead to the dominance and military intervention that they criticize. You shouldn't have fell for the reverse pit of doom in cross-examination. They see the backdoors. They said this is also solved by our framing argument. If it's not, then all of your solvency deficits, they counterplan link to you too, because it proves how fragile your discourse is, and that it's not static. It gets reinterpreted and gets redeployed. The permutation is severance to demining and military presence, which we maintain global security. And 13. Continued military presence demonstrates the U.S. commitment to developing trust and destroying aggressors through operations such as demining activities. Landmines were a major area of focus of special operation forces in cooperation with the host nation and U.S. government agencies designed to manage a training program to improve mine awareness, detection, recovery, and treating of casualties. Presence is a function of U.S. forces. They must reduce presence operations at troop levels. This moves in 94. Forces fulfill three functions: presence, crisis response, and sustained large-scale combat. The term has been used since the 1960s, but it has never been used to define in the JCS dictionary. Presence is years more defined by routine operation of forces to influence foreign governments without the combat. The presence is not constitutive of a strategy. The definition is derived from the national military strategy distributed to the DoD staff. An important characteristic of the presence is the absence of combat places, and continuing presence is not violent. Sustained combat seeks to change the adversary behavior through violence. The three define the distinctive kinds of capabilities. Presence is a kind of routine capability. Presence missions include humanitarian operations. Actually, that's fine. We don't have to read the evidence, but also all this definition that makes the distinction between the different types of presence also proves that we don't link to any of their military shape-shifting arguments, because we're not a form of combative military presence that is there for stability rhetoric or attempting to solve the failed state, which means that we don't link to any of that. So if they say military humanitarianism is problematic, our tailored contingent application of military humanitarianism has a limited scope. R2P rules prevent the use of intervention as a tool of imperialism, proves that they need to win. The counterplan is a violent instance of colonialism rather than applying abstract claims for universally heinous crimes like mining. It's worth taking action. Missing M9. The legitimization or the use of unauthorized force and humanitarian grounds to wealth promotion concern is evident that the Commission was keen to dispel any potential allegation that the tool of R2P is used for imperialism and military intervention is different from previous articulation of humanitarian intervention by setting the bar high with regard to the gravity of the crimes required. The perception of imperialism or avoid the R2P criteria for military intervention means that R2P cannot be a smokescreen for bullies. Many label the R2P imperialism, but an objective observer must note that its limited scope, which addresses only universally acknowledged crimes, so more serious. There's no hidden agenda behind the counterplan. You have to read evidence that proves that demining efforts are designed as an imperial conquest. Staying focused is good. Transnational indigenous groups are supportive of the counterplan, which proves that it's not imperialist, but also that the local populations want it. Bernstein in the campaign of landmines is seen as a quintessential expression of the ability to committed civil society to play a meaningful role in resolving key issues of our times. So staying focused remains a critical objective, not abandoning the work until the job is done, and it remains focused. The campaign is really a transnational group of citizens who recognize the problem and took the action before the change. There are other permutation that says that permutation trained them, then leaves obviously intrinsic. It also justifies the counter permutation to continue to demine, and then after the mining is done, then leave. But intrinsicness is bad because justifies conditionality makes garnering a negative offense impossible because they can read extra topical points despite kind of all of our dissents. They say the counterplan is white guilt. All of these solvency deficits apply just as much to them because it would get reinterpreted. All of their criticisms of military environmentalism are about using things like emission-friendly tanks, etc., but doesn't link to the counterplan because it's not a tool of colonialism. Case. I'm going to make a couple of solvency arguments here, but now I'm going to get more to the case in the 1 and R. One, they say colonialism is worse impact in the round. Obviously, colonialism is terrible, but the solvency should be the frame through which you evaluate all of the impacts. Do not allow them to get away in the 1 ER and 2 ER with grandiose impact claims or root cause arguments about colonialism structuring every pervasive injustice in the world. If they don't have a mechanism to solve it, why does removing presence from Djibouti solve the presence that we have in the Gulf and Northeast Asia that is equally tailored to the same fear of failed states and civility discourse that they criticize? They say discourse changes the way the media characterizes this. Cross-sex was pretty damning now. The media is too ingrained to disrupt. How do you change the way Fox News uses it? This answer is there, no link to the shift arguments, because it proves that the military won't think about your plan as an attempt to end failed state discourse. They'll just be like, we don't need military presence here, we're going to shift it elsewhere. Other stuff's going to come in. Yeah, that's fine.
Right, so what's your defense of how the counterplan resolves failed state rhetoric?
It ends the military presence for the objectives that they're there, which is to resolve failed states.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means.
So it's no longer there as a stabilizing operation to like combat terrorism or prevent, like Al-Shabaab or.
So what is the exact blank?
The text of the counterplan that says we will end all missions associated with the Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa, and instead redirect those
So
towards.
the justification for the counterplan is based off of this fiat of like we won't do fucked up shit.
No, it's in the same way that the plan is. So none of our cards that we read for the counterplan were based on colonialism or stabilization rhetoric. They were based on demining because it causes structural violence, which if your argument is true, that justifications matter.
Let's talk about demining for a second.
Yeah.
Your first piece of global security evidence puts demining in the context of like continued military presence demonstrates U.S. commitment developing trust and deterring aggressors through operations such as demining activities. So demining activities seems like it's a means to continue operations such as deterring aggressors.
That's underlined poorly. The reason that
it's
the next sentence.
It's the same sentence.
No, it's the next sentence. There's a period there, and then it talks about operations for demining activities.
Sure.
You're right. Our presence there in the SQO is used for deterring aggressors. We criticize that, say that we shouldn't do that. We end those missions.
How do you divorce the fact that demining activities are always going to be talked about in the context of things such as deterring aggressors?
How do you divorce yourself from the way that the DoD will describe withdrawal of presence
That's not
as
the same question.
overstretch?
I'm talking about
It absolutely
the methodology of the counter plan, which is just demining operations, is talked in the context of like war on terror.
Yeah, and withdrawals are talked about in the context of overstretch and improving military readiness, which proves that.
Sure, I understand, but the evidence that you are reading, where do you read evidence that says demining is not delinked from like aggressive activity?
Where do you read evidence that says reduction isn't delinked from overstretch?
Right,
all of the evidence in the 1 and C says that.
It's your burden to prove why demining is not going to be seen as another liberal activity.
And it's your burden, to prove that withdrawal will not be seen. If you want to go for this solvency deficit, you're going to have zero risk of solving.
Let's talk about your Demukes evidence. It defines presence here is defined as the routine operation of forces to influence foreign governments without combat. Is that what presence you endorse in the world of the
No. So that we made a distinction here. Presence means 3 things. Those are the 3. One of them, though, is humanitarian assistance. We keep our presence there to do that.
That's not the card I'm
looking at. You read a card that said
humanitarian
resistance was a form of presence in policing, though, and then you tried to come out of it.
Right. We say you have to prove that our form of humanitarian assistance.
Post-mining, what does the U.S. do? We destroyed all the mines. What does the military do?
Probably withdraw after we no longer need to be there.
So presence does not need to be there.
After we demine now.
Okay, that's cool.
The counterplan obviously doesn't.
What are they doing on their free time while they're there now?
What do you mean?
What are they going to do on their free time when they're not demining?
Oh, and the counterplan has them demine.
What are they going to do on their free time?
I don't know, sit around the base, play video games.
Sit around the base and play video games. You know what's the second time you read that response to that question? Where if you got video games.
What do the troops do that you leave?
They're dead. We eliminate the troops.
So then they come back home?
Right.
Oh, they just put that.
Play video games.
It's a disadded case.
Is everyone good?
No.
Withdrawals the final straw that breaks credible deterrence and green lights Iranian aggression, betrayals to slap in the face of allies that cause breaches of armies that breaks the NBC, short flight times guarantee miscount, and escalation, war, structural violence, both seen one many, support this rest on the substance and injustice, culture for the evidence towards the other way, wars on product capitalism, imperialism, gender, aggression, or any other cause by the war has fueled, and sustained peace and justice, the emphasis on justice seems to be empirically inadequate. They can't outweigh on their racialization. In fact, the disadvantageous regimes other than the U.S. can perpetrate colonialism. The Riyadh regime is uniquely problematic, executes people for homosexuality and increasing the status quo to 1,000 per month. Women cannot go anywhere without a chaperone, drive a car, wear clothes, or wear makeup that show off their beauty, interact with men, go for a swim, compete in sports, try on clothes and shopping. They pour acid on women's faces for dress code. Dig in 14, there's been space of acid attacks and young women victims were chosen because they were wearing clothes they were revealing, did not conform to law of North Data. Also side one of her side, partial sighting the other, leaving her burning in her eyes, her left ear, next hands led towards her false. She not committed a single crime. Maram was driving with the windows pulled down and wearing through the liters of acid towards the women around required by law to cover themselves head to toe. The Mediterranean is turning into a cemetery. The Syrian refugee crisis proves a 3-year-old child washed up on shore. Their assurance is necessary to ensuring regional stability, and even if it's an evil, it's a necessary one. Their intervention turn. There's no propensity for intervention in the squad because of the public and budget, but a war would not necessarily draw us in. Also begs the question of solvency, which we contested. Ben, on the 11th, the driving idea behind the Western quest for damages and payment contention, around stream politically and economically exhaustive potential electric family for shared priorities, American law and cable imposing values through costly military investment. America is pretty consumed priorities, these are tying economic ties and imperial military. America must put down source and order of change, assumes that limits our American power must seek to minimize entanglement in foreign conflicts. The U.S. Army will be Victorian nation building constabulary. They say other troops in the GCC are sufficient deterrence against Iran. This does not assume uniqueness in which allies are extremely cautious and status quo. The Polak evidence is fantastic that they are watching our every single move. Djibouti is necessarily key. Rosen 13, Djibouti's important to the overseas at the mouth of Red Sea, the possible modern Gulf of Aden, the ocean, Suez Canal, border Somalia, the Al-Shabaab, and prioritizing the ocean and Raj from Somalia, prioritizing down the fixed naval surveillance to Djibouti, the borders of Ethiopia, and region 2 countries, the Cold War, the short fight to Al-Qaeda and reinforcing strongholds in Yemen would be so much trouble. We didn't have the hub for intelligence operation corner in East Africa, one of the largest UAV outside base against international drone campaign against Al-Qaeda and curtail Perseus, home base of CT, GFOHOA, Djibouti, so where the U.S. is going to be the first sale for future months away, countering land sea base terrorists in the southern Arabian Peninsula, and we face the U.S. allied oil states Arabian Peninsula. Djibouti's disabled brittle category can unravel all of the correctly future U.S. security dependent on paying attention to Djibouti's irreplaceable stability is intrinsically linked to that of the broader region. They say the impacts inevitable. One, this does not assume how Iran is building regional influence to expand the Islamic revolution. Djibouti is specifically one side of this. ITIC 9, Iran's interest in Horn Africa, freedom of ground for military Africa is part of Iran's strategy to Germany in the Middle East to support the Islamic revolution, establish a political Iran present capable of withdrawing, threatening middle sea links, Ukraine, naval corridors, smuggle weapons, terrorist operatives, Hezbollah, which Iran uses to transfer reference to Moscow, Iran strengthening ties with Eritrea and Djibouti used to horse and executive terrorist subversive political activity against the moderate Arabian countries. Two, this links to them more the inevitability of repression and instability is used to justify endless presence, which means that they replicate the failed state discourse that they criticize. If they sever out of this argument, then there's no solvency for the affirmative. The Iranian critique, there's no link to this. Our argument was Saudi prolif collapsing the NPT, not Iranian. A Saudi prolif is an ally, which proves that their Orientalism argument is only halfway true because of the fact that we said allies could draw us in a conflict. It proves that the U.S. regime is more unstable than what they attempt to preserve stability in other countries. Their second prolif case too generic. The impacts to the could outweigh the can flip ethics. Forward 11. Nuclear weapons to introduce substantial harm on civilization, world responsible, morality, unfair, have not competition, no particular held the potential to destroy humanity is irrelevant whether their possession unfairly distributing no solution to make balance fair and unfair accountable states, but towards a perfectly good solution, question ability far more important distribution located from non-prolif driven equality is obvious and equality loser role belongs to be allowed unfair determinants distracted from the outcomes in the global environment. The aft doesn't generate uniqueness for the side which means sustainable. There's no offense for them. Case. Not going for any of our shift arguments, we'll concede all of them are non-unique, which proves all the all causes argument. This is why colonization is edible. Even if in cross-six they concede that there's no PMCs in the status quo, we will concede their argument on the flow, which those PMCs and drones in Africa still exist, which means the act cannot remove them without not being topical. PMCs are independent. Ridlin 8. PMFs in Iraq received independent from the armed forces. These PMFs are separate and distinct from the armed forces, have no affiliation. Many of the PMFs are not even in contact with the government. Such subcontractors to this player, private companies minimize the need to ties that the PMFs have to the government. If they do solve for this exposed limits, it makes it impossible for us to gain any offense based on shift to disouts and it kills ground, which is a necessary argument on this topic. The knowledge debate proper. Two framing issues. This is not offense for them. If we win, their knowledge production doesn't change militarism. You should evaluate our disad first because it proves that they have no solvency for the colonialism impact. Also, I think that also decolonizing international relations fails. It's been tried. Pugue 11 grief. Growing a deep interest has been decolonization where such critiques do not necessarily solve the paradox towards altering country privilege acting in the context of peace, building its broad intervention to red to map has also become a received Western serious act never there is only one conflict variable among the they totalize academia to say that the DoD operates within the same little base as the colonial IR proves that they have a bad understanding of scholarship, which replicates to the form of objectification that they criticize. Extend our Petros argument. They are anti-imperialism, imperialism, failure to attend to long-term consequences, ensure that even if they are beneficial form of knowledge production, it does nothing for how imperialism actually changes face. I'll give some contextualization on this. Eastern Europe traded Russian for U.S. domination, and one of the impacts was a white slaver's paradise in Kosovo. Clearly absent U.S. influence in Africa, China will have more influence because their policies are seen as less dominating than the U.S. This creates a new form of militarism that seems more friendly and more in control by African rulers, making colonialism hard to fight against because it's subtle and thus hard to convince people to fight against. Your authors are deluded. Academics can't change the intervention apparatus. Robinson found there are many respectable well-intentioned academics from the first world who have heard to Trump the new modalities U.S. intervention to believe that the seeds themselves and believe they can participate in electric can use political invention or some mastery to help so instead to foreign policy. Academics are opportunities well-intentioned, but there's opposite all here to power and privilege that many first world intellectuals bring to the global south. There's an academic colonial mentality over so-called intervention, promotion, convertible academic industry that seems linked with intervention apparatus projects of domination always have their organic individual. The prevailing world has attacked many intellectual defenses and then served to mystify the real and are working to the merging order. These intellectuals become central gaps and instances of global capitalist domination, market domination. Lastly, center colonization turn the app becomes co-opted as a convenient alibi for internal bureaucrats bought off by the imperial complex to sustain instability.
Can you start?
What?
8:22. Or 8:20. Case T kind of Case T Iran kind of plan. I don't wanna go. Ready? Okay. Take theater on background question colonialism remains two forms of violation of eradication of oppression. One is the idea between native and the settlers, between the settler and the colonized population itself. That becomes fundamentally problematic because how you inflict violence with any population itself is inherently a disadvantage to all of their framing questions, because in a world where multi-presence staying there create two forms of violence which are intrinsically bad allow any of their arguments to do. They did absolutely no impact how to do here and cross-pie onto the other folks. The notion of bare system you have on their bare life and stuff outweighs the question of extinction scenarios, because they simply say the policing and people with the jobs and Muslim states uniquely bad the same way that policing blackness becomes uniquely bad in the fields or for having simply the African notion of policing population is also the notion of policing. It's intrinsic to the body. The idea of having military presence who walk around with freaking guns and suits on is one that is inherently violent. This mere policing argument that ABBA goes for twisting, which is partially unresponsible to filter all arguments to now the notion of laboratory violence is all the Northeast Asian arguments arguments is Djibouti and the Great Horn of Africa, the laboratory violence against exporters to other countries because discourse still feels it was being constructed there now. It's not just about military presence here, but about military violence in general and general responses to PMC. Creative and also want they do not increase to the mechanism. You want to see not a fundamental disadvantage. You want to see they go for more of a circumvention argument, but arguments that we minimize the possibility for violence on two levels. One is that the PMC notion will never get to the question of truth. There's about 8,000 troops that are there, and there's about another 3,000 that are accessible. The notion of PMCs is a merit scale in any single way. And the other question, PMCs have never filled in for troops in a world where all these troops have been reduced. And in fact, there's no historical example that contextualize this in any sort of way. The notion of PMCs filling in anywhere doesn't actually apply. Not as a decolonizing international relations does become possible only through the constitution, because the only way preventing a mode of two discoursive rounds. One, we interrupt the academy. They have to succeed this argument of how the notion debates based on our academic interruptions here are uniquely key for decolonizing. We engage in education practice and discussion where we consider ourselves policymakers and future advocates who won't sway. Taking sort of episode understanding how the notion of field state is for now. The second argument is about the notion of trying to deal with the plan. From the scholarship, you want to see the notion of the legal discourse. What if the plan itself also assumes the scholarship and reality justification are associated in one about diction colonialism. Now we always want working what's the long-term consequence. We'll let another flow and say I don't believe that we have the one that we influence African rulers. The African rulers argument has no relationship to the one because we have different methods of diction. Not going to TBB.
Read what I wrote.
Oh, sorry, in the case debate. Robinson Culture and SaSh believe in the goodness of becoming Robin. Democracy promotion, we agree that they are diluted and the pew card. Only a constant not resolving the paradox of subaltern. A constant academia that you can't decolonize international relations. We're the ones who have a specific men on T debate. They folks see that they can't believe near. And Djibouti is the only base in Djibouti. Their argument about the truth being Somalia are only extension of the camp, and they can't believe. That's why they said there's no base in Somalia. There are only troops in Somalia because all the troops come from base in the camp. That is in Camp Lemonnier is the only base in Africa. You can Google this shit. Their older arguments are bullshit. All the reasonability arguments, they said it leads to justice eventually about bullshit because we said parameters for reasonability arguments that they get access to all the disadvantages, but they also get access to and then disadvantages outside that also is established more offense based on that sort of reduction. Also, they conceded our counter-assertion in the end argument and of the law, so you can extend interpretation of reason you can evaluate the one you see because they have an offensive risk to reject that. Also, a notion of end is question of how we put inside the room more presence. That's enough, right? Yeah. Iran deal. All Iran deal arguments about naval surveillance is uniquely key to constitution. The argument is that naval surveillance has nothing to do with freaking the Horn of Africa. Rather happens in the outskirts and having the ocean and the sea. That means that it's a fundamental question how the nuclear health or bare life argument will be outweighing here. You cross in the case of the externalized form of violence. This is in the United States or what? In China, externalized form of violence. I say things that are happening in the Muslim population and things that are happening in the Arab states. They're pushing up from fundamentally problematic because they're trying to mask the violence that happens intrinsically because of the notion of colonial logic. Things that happen, particularly the black bodies, like the notion of death, how many more people die here from recent abuse or conflict, police brutality in jail cells, and happening over there. We're trying to external because of the field states discourse that's rooted in one. Now they have, you can see the Orientals in terms of the notion of impact service when you're predicted of the repair medic, along with the fundamentally violent because the structure of the Oriental logic. I even try to otherize other populations. You extend the evidence coming out, and then two ways. If you only read one corridor, it's amazing that they chose not too interesting. That means you can filter all of their impact arguments from all their analysis through the lens of Western representation becomes from running problematic goals or regional stability arguments are already criticized by the money people showing space stability. And the problematic can only use as a liberal peace building consensus that only maintains the structural forms of power relation are fundamentally problematic. Go to the last quote.
Presence in Persian Gulf solved.
President of Persian Gulf solves. Now go to the last quote. They to create structural violence, status quo violence, and while the president still there, and I say psychological violence, they just created God must find for power relation. There's three major disasters you can evaluate the entire arguments from. First, is the policing is an inherently bad argument. That was already in the case about how the notion of police exists in your first place. One is inherently violent. You can cross by that pole here. Next argument is that the dependency argument. Some of the folks you can see them on the creating notion of dependency. The reason why there's no infrastructure to be able to demine in the first place is because they've created a dependency relationship between the African states and between the United States, which is fundamentally problematic because as long as we continue to be the freaking white saviors who are like every time we discuss them in the field school, like, there's a problem over there, let's run and go freaking help them. It only restructures and only maintains the same sort of relationship fundamentally problematic. They have not enough of defensive answer to the permutation, but you can extend the permutation that we can do. They want to see them in the plan because there's not nearly enough. All we say is that we can psych out extratropical things, not about what we just fly, but a question of what we do. You can evaluate the permutation and learn that you can engage and you want to see by first training the actions if you really think that's necessary, and extend the because it's necessary to minimize the amount of troops that are there because they're inherently violent. It's not a separate argument because it happens both at the same time, and we still maintain the question you want to see now work with scholarship and academic restructure policy, and you cannot reinterpolate the plan and in a bad way. We have a disadvantage to their justification. One, they simply to isolate a disadvantage to their justification argument is that because they have articulated these kinds of the failed states which are unable to support themselves and able to demine, that only maintains the larger narrative of incapable countries, which justifies them going in and going out of them, like our diversion evidence indicates, which only creates inter and interracial conflicts in these regions.
GCC. Counterplan.
Wait,
Case.
GCC.
Allied Pro. Gulf
Yeah.
Gulf Security Council.
Wait, sorry, TDISAD?
T disad counterplan case.
Okay.
Wait, GCC. Gulf Cooperation Council. Blanked on me.
One sec.
All right.
Just get my timer out.
Anyone not ready? No easier way to vote negative on Top County. They've conceded a large portion of the debate, and Top Golf version of the app frames all their offenses should be an easy decision and something you can check out on. Now, first, they've conceded to impact arguments. One is ground. You allow for shifting presence regionally within the region. This is terrible in a Northeast Asia topic, or any Japan app, for example, withdrawal would lead to them shifting it closer to Japan if you don't specify Northeast Asia in the plan text, but just say that we withdraw from Japan. They've conceded that it's ungrammatically precise, which forces ungrammatical reading of the resolution to determine negative ground. If I say that the resolution is JV has to leave Texas, but you just say plan JV leaves Austin, that doesn't necessarily mean that he leaves Texas, which proves that he doesn't meet the resolution, because he can simply go to Dallas, which is the whole point of our argument. Djibouti, they say Djibouti is the only base, the only base in the region. This doesn't answer our argument. First, there's other presence in the region and other types of presence. Presence isn't just bases, there's drones, troops, which is why our spec argument made that argument. They'll just shift the base over. Their second is that their criticism of the military, if it's true, it proves that the military will just shift it to other regions. Now, reasonability, you did not extend a counter-interpretation, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Reasonability is not. I'm sorry, they conceded to arbitrary and self-serving leads to judge intervention because it takes debate out of the debater's hands, which is the ultimate impact of the debate. Top version of the app solves their offense, which means that reasonability is arbitrary anyways. Their only counter-interpret was that presence means withdrawing it means permanent. You can permanently withdraw, but add Horn of Africa at the end of the plan text. They have no offense. That's why theirs is good. They've conceded offsets, counterplans are good. Only risk of offense. Counterplan. Or sorry, dissent. Dissent, I'm not going to go for it, but they've made a couple of concessions here that are bad. One, the Benami Evans indicates that there's no infinite war, which should be impact defense if they win a solvency deficit. The counterplan Benami Evans indicates that things like the budget sequestration as well as the lack of public will means that there's no infinite militarization. This is impacting against infinite imperialism. Not going to go for the counterplan, but their Orientalism turn doesn't apply because the counterplan's also able to solve it. It changes the operational value of the mission, but also the forward Evans indicates they've conceded, says that they flipped the script, which reinverts the unethical choice of proliferation. Our evidence was not Orientalist because it was about Saudi proliferation, which was an ally, not their credit was just about Iran. Doesn't apply. The counterplan. Counterplan solves the entirety of the case, even if they win a solvency deficit. Here's a couple of framing issues. One, big differentials are bad. Make them impact out the solvency deficit, even if it solves less. Why does it lead to the case impacts or outweigh the net benefit we are winning? Second is that the case is not 100% solvent, which I'll get to a little bit more in the case. The counterplan solves because first it ends the military operations. They have no evidence that makes a distinction between reducing the removal of the presence and ending the operations. Their framing arguments prove why it doesn't matter, because it's just about what the justifications we use to inform the policy. I explicitly conceded their Davis evidence, so they read in the 1AC and the 2NC about why the justifications of the plan are more important. Second is that we saw their failed state discourse arguments better than they do. This was a conceded argument, which is also a takeout to the AF. The AF does not have a monopoly on how the media spins a plan. Reductions have empirically been explained as have been spun as an attempt to solve for overstretch of the military or solve for readiness. The plan will be spun as the military saying the situation in Djibouti is too unstable for the safety of our troops, which is why we have to withdraw. If all of that happens, it means that the counterplan solves it better because it remains all of our troops in the region, but changes the operation towards solving structural violence, which solves their militarism bad arguments line by line. You should not allow any new application in the 2AR because I explicitly framed in the 2NC they have to prove why our instance of the counterplan is the same form of policing they are counterplan. The counterplan is not policing. We can see that Davis evidence indicates that our instance isn't bad. Assuming that the U.S. can never do anything good, foreclose the possibility of reparations, which in some instances can be good. They can see the thief example saying that the thief should pay back the money doesn't necessarily affirm the thief as being a good thing. Now they said their only argument they can win here is the dependency argument. There's one. The 1NC Riley and Jones evidence indicates that U.S. troops are key. There is tremendous demand for East Africa for capacity building related to detecting and defusing improved explosive devices because they don't have the capability right now. It proves that failure to do so, the counterplan is the worst option. It results in massive structural violence because they've conceded the impact. It would deny them the explicit request from Djibouti civilians and ensures them the worst impacts. We read evidence indicates that their civil societies wanted. Here's a line from the evidence. There is a tremendous demand from Northeast Africa for the types of capacity building that are necessary for national and regional security, detecting and defusing improvised explosive devices. Yeah. Now, The counterplan, they've conceded the impact outweighs the effect because it solves a massive amount of structural violence that kills more people than biological nuclear weapons combined. It also takes out their livelihood because they can't use things like farming land because the mines are over their agriculture. Now this was an impact that wasn't really felt. This impact wasn't really answered, but also since we solved most of the case, it definitely outweighs. Now the permutation is intrinsic and severance. They conceded that our definitions of military presence that we leave them in the region. So any permutation that results in the withdrawal obviously links to the net benefit because we can't demine any permutation that does the counterplan. They've conceded are the dismukes evidence as well as global security, which means that the counterplan is worse. None of their global military humanitarianism specific to the plan. They concede the R2P argument that it's not a tool for imperialism. That's Semasium evidence. It's about the legitimization that we use to use it, which means our discourse solves the link. Let me make sure we're good. Yes. Okay. Case. At the top, the 1ER, as I predicted, was very heavy on the impact by saying we conceded the impact shapes everything colonialism. But remember in the 2NT when we said the feasibility of solvency should frame the way you evaluate impact calculus. None of the root cause arguments make any sense if you don't have a way to solve it. One rejection from Djibouti does not do shit for solving anti-blackness globally or policing that occurs through other mechanisms. You can if this that has a couple of implications. One, it means that you absolutely cannot outweigh the dissent because you do not solve for militarism or policing that occurs globally in the GCC or any other country or even in the United States. Second, it proves that the app becomes self-satisfied gesture that believes that what they've done is sufficient to solve our Pew evidence says that decolonizing IR has empirically failed. It's too academic and insulated from the real world. You cannot change security apparatus because it's too self-satisfied, which ultimately proves that you become self-satisfied with what you've done, which proves that we wipe our hands clean once we leave the academy, which leaves the broader structures that lead to militarism intact, which means they can't solve. We conceded that PMCs are there now, which takes out the impact. Yeah, the media will spin the plan to mean something else. They don't have a monopoly over that. If they do, then the justifications we use for the counterplan also mean that we solve.
T, Iran, case counterplan. T, Iran, case counterplan. Oh, not 9. Okay. They have conceived from the Tuasi and the 1AR our interpretation of in means under the law or provision of which means we reduce presence in the Gulf under the province of Djibouti. There is no law that extends over the greater Horn of Africa. This was conceded in both speeches, which means it's an easy out for in terms of interpretation. You are in the room, but you are not throughout the room, which is what their definition presupposes about requiring a general regional reduction only. We are a grammatical interpretation of the plan because we cannot have a reduction throughout the region of the greater Horn of Africa if the base is just in Djibouti. Now this has a couple of implications. First, they say we can see that the topical form of our aft. No, we didn't. All of our arguments are about how the topical version of the aft does not solve. One is that because Camp Lemonnier is a base, you cannot move it to other places. Second is that because it's a coin strategy, those troops cannot be implemented in other places because they are designated to perform only in Djibouti. The third argument was that Djibouti is the only enduring presence in Africa, which means if we have a stable definition of what military presence is, which they have defined as troops or bases, then moving them to Somalia doesn't provide any significant presence in any of the region, which over limits their definition of the topic, which probably worse for them. They say there's a ground shift because of Asia. This proves our argument. This is a context dependent on each region. If we have proven why the aft is an enduring form of presence, there's a reason why we do not need to have an explicit regional shift. The third argument is that they can see that our scholarship solves these arguments. They do not designate a place where we need to preclude that inter-regional transfer. If the 1AC makes a solvency claim that we do not move our troops anywhere else, that should be sufficient to meet the burden. They do not make this solvency distinction, and also allows them to access any of their ground arguments because we give them ground in terms of the disad. Only they explode ground because they get to have any form of offset counterplan that can change the aft to any regional minute tasking operations, which kills off ground and kills any form of clash because we wouldn't be able to generate offense against these minute counterplan. The counter-interpretation solves because we have designated that you must reduce presence under the provision of a specific country. That should solve all of your ground arguments. They say other presence. We don't shift the base. They conceded that reasonability does provide an objective standard because our standard was that you have access to disads, which is an objective standard for why our interpretation solves your arguments. Good. Okay. Iran disad. Only two arguments. They say that there's no infinite war. They concede that structural violence is happening every day in Africa and in the SaSh, which means that there is a violence going on in terms of colonialism because of our intervention. The second argument that says there's no infinite imperialism, that we conceded all the framing of our shift arguments in terms of the case debate says that military presence shift arguments prove that there's a push for intervention everywhere because of military presence, which means that we have uniqueness for our critique. There is a push to re-intervene in everywhere. Also, the second argument is that without disrupting any form of failed state rhetoric, there's a constant need for intervention because the U.S. has a legitimate need to intervene in other countries. Now, the case debate first, here's a warrant for the colonizing IR impossible case trial. There's almost always an arrogance of power and privilege that many first world intellectuals bring to their study of the global south. There's an academic colonial mentality at work. Only we destroy this by disrupting academia and how we analyze global south and calling into question colonialism. This is the argument we have been making since the beginning, which is why every analytic we make is always responsive. No solvency. This was their only defense against the absence. Their media argument has no impact. Don't deny the good in the face of the perfect. Being scared of media reaction does not negate the present still shouldn't exist, but rather that the state might think about it. Also, the media does not have an influence on actual government material implications, which means that there's no shift or there's no media spin impact for the way that the app is reinterpreted in terms of academia. They say that we don't decrease policing in Djibouti in a spillover claim, but all of our Bachman evidence is why Djibouti is a laboratory for the exportation of violence, which means our presence there influences the way that foreign policy and re-interventionary ethos is re-implicated. Now, I've already answered the self-satisfied argument by the insight of their decolonization arguments. Now, also their Robinson evidence says things such as democracy promotion ideologies are bad and always are self-satisfied. Yes, we are critiquing this type of ideology. They say IR is too insulated. It's not. We don't say we clean our hands of colonialism and we're satisfied, but we open the space to decolonize IR. The app is not a simple end, but it's a means to an end of dismantling the system. They say PMCs are there now. They're inevitably removed via the decolonial ethic of the app. They say media spin. I already answered that above. Kaplan. Colonialism policing our big dissent of the Kaplan first discourse and plan action are inexorably tied. This is implicated by descending evidence that if you define the terms of race, the discursive level, it creates a policy story at the political level. Now, second, the existence of military presence is always intrinsically violent because it doesn't answer the fundamental question of the corporeal body of the military being there is violent in the first place. It creates a policing population which destroys access to agency and the condition for revolutionary possibility. None of their evidence assumes how troops will act when they get there, but rather just the existence of our troops are good. Our 1AC analysis of renaming missions as being bad is explicitly applicable here because they only change what the mission allows for violence to occur. Now, humanitarian missions like demining become an extension of the policing apparatus. The Bachmann evidence talks about how the U.S. still maintains a foothold in African countries even during peacetime to ensure the long-term stability of its nation-building effort. This is why you should be suspect of the counterplan. View it as a civilian takes on the combatant command. Now, 3 is they can see the no white guilt argument that the U.S. shouldn't feel obligated to go and resolve violence because they feel obligated to go and resolve every instance of violence. Now, 4 is if deminers would be considered military presence because of lack of weapons and shit, then the counterplan is not competitive because we reduce military presence and we leave them there. Now, 5 is their response to dependency argument. Terrible. Here is where you vote out because dependency is the reason why African populations do not have infrastructure to solve their problems in the first place. They say they say the media spin argument, but the counterplan probably links to this too because if you don't shape the discourse, then you do not change the way that it's implemented. They say counterplan is not policing. Yes, it is. Any form of military presence is a form of policing which creates perpetual genocide and the ordering of population. They say the impact outweighs, but yeah, it doesn't.
Get a bit.
Bachmann is a 1AC part.
Yep. There's two pieces of Bachmann evidence, both are in the 1AC.
Okay.
Do you need anything from us?
think that the topical version, their version of the AFs, there's no offensive reason to prefer your interpretation of presence, which is the only way that I could conclude that you're topical. And the definition of presence as the base allows for the example of abuse that the negative forwards, which is the idea that you could close the base and shift the troops elsewhere, or close the base and leave the troops. They say that's the reason and I just don't think that there's any reason other than reasonability by which I would conclude that the affirmative is topical. And they have arguments as to why reasonability is a bad standard, that it promotes judge intervention, and that debater control is the point of debate, and that that's a better model for deciding it, and that their interpretation would still allow for the important parts of the AF to be debated. So, and then they say offset counterplans are good, as sort of something that's preserved by their interpretation. The thing that I don't guess I struggle with it. The reason that I don't, I thought that the impact work, there's very little impact work on T in the 2NR, and so it's sufficient because of the topical version of the AF argument, the fact that reasonability is key, whatever. But it's like anyway, I don't have a lot to say actually, because I think that they're right on that question. So
what is the topical version of the AF that you understand from?
If you say Horn of Africa, remove presence from Horn of Africa.
What about the interpretation of what in means as a grammatical reading of the resolution?
Which portion of that?
In, because they defined in as throughout,
right,
the region, and then we defined in as under the province of,
right,
or under the law of.
But I don't know what the advantage of that interpretation would be. In terms of competing interpretations, I just still don't know why that's good, other than it's reasonable. And it does make sense in a regional context. Those arguments make sense, but they're not limiting particularly, and they have kind of these, debate games playing reasons why the other interpretation is better. It's not really tied back to any overarching impact, about fairness or education, but your debate, your counter impacts or your interpretation aren't either. You don't impact reasonability particularly in those terms.
And then my other question was, what about the scholarship preclusion argument? Because we're a critique of military presence, we don't want to transfer it anywhere. So that provides a.
Well, you still tie that argument to reasonability. You say the objective standard would be, since we're not going to go for link arguments like that we're reasonable. I see that as still under the rubric in terms of a justification as a topicality answer, kind of about this question of abuse versus potential abuse.
Okay.
And that would rely on reasonability as the justification.
And the impact to reasonability is just.
It's bad. It's a bad model because debaters should decide, and then their particular interpretation is, offsets, etc. That there is potential for abuse, right? And again, the impact work is not developed by either side. And in all honesty, I went about my decision probably in the way that I should not, because I don't really give a shit about the T argument. So but I arrived at a place where I felt like I needed to evaluate the T argument, and that's how I decided. So, because I do think, as much as I feel like the negative is ahead in terms of the spin, and I think that this is very dangerous on the counterplan, I do think that the Bachman evidence is quite good at suggesting why the counterplan would probably be not solvent of much of the AF, or at least there's a significant risk of that. Now, the AF left something to be desired in that respect as well, in terms of comparing that impact versus the humanitarian impact, or even if I remove the language of humanitarianism, the structural impact. But I actually thought maybe that debate was less close than it was, because it appeared as if the negative was pretty far ahead actually on that question. And then as I looked at the evidence, I realized that's not actually the case. And so then reluctantly looked at the topicality debate. But
So in terms of like how I should better debate this question, what advice do you have?
Like for this particular debate?
For the T debate.
Yeah, I think that, well, you can have some offense against the competing interpretations mode, reasons why that's a bad way to view it. Expand the impact portion of the reasonability debate in terms of what is the purpose of topicality, connect it to questions of education and fairness, rather than as it is, everyone sort of allows for that stuff, those portions of the debate to appear as if there's one conception of one conception of education and fairness, and it's whether or not these standards access it or not. So even if there are limitations in the way that some of that has been debated earlier, if there's been lip service given to the question of education or fairness, you might actually be able to sneak in new-ish arguments that justify reasonability as a standard. Sort of tactically speaking, that would be the way to do it. And you say, well, it's not new. It actually revolves around the question of what we think fairness is or what we think education is. And you try to find the places in the 1AR or the 2AC where you spoke about that, and then highlight the fact that they didn't speak about that. And that would be the way of at least kind of pushing the issue as to whether or not this question had been dealt with in some way, right? Just sort of tactically speaking, how to handle it in the debate. Because it does. I mean, they probably produce different kinds of education or different kinds of fairness, right? So that would be my suggestion.
And then just more like other like kinds of answers. Do you think that it's like persuasive to say, because we're like a coin operation, like we wouldn't be able to like transfer anywhere else because these troops are specific to Djibouti?
What is the because we're a coin operation part of that?
Or like they're only trained to like work in Djibouti, so like you can't transfer them anywhere else.
Your argument is that there's something intrinsic to coin training, which means that they have particular like regional or cultural knowledge, so they couldn't go elsewhere?
Like they're only trained to operate in Djibouti. So like,
because of the nature of coin, because it's so culturally specific?
Yeah.
Maybe, although they say you could close the base and leave the people under your interpretation. If what you rely upon is the counter-interpretation of what presence means.
Okay.
But if you're going to rely on it, and if that's essential to the notion of speaking only about Djibouti, right? Because then they could say, well, that actually isn't right. The base could close. Their coin, they don't need to be housed on a base. They could live wherever. So the cultural constriction or condition doesn't necessarily help that much, I don't think. I didn't understand that was what you meant by that argument either at all.
Yeah.
So,
wait, so how does the topical version resolve the closing base, leaving people question?
well, because it means it's about people, period.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay.
it's people in the region.
But how is that a decrease in present? I don't understand.
Well, it's a decrease in presence. I don't know, actually, I don't understand your question.
No, so you said closing the base would not be topical, right?
Right.
Because you could still leave the people there?
That's right.
So is that just based off their interpretation of presence as just people?
That's based on a disadvantage to your interpretation of presence as bases only.
Okay.
And they say there's another way to solve that. Irrespective of an interpretation of presence, they say the way to solve that is to add the region.
Yeah, so what I'm asking is, yeah, so
If
what
you
I'm
add the region,
yeah.
then everybody's got to be out,
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
right?
Yeah. Because you can close the base, but you could still leave the people there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But you said remove people from the base. What was the but our plan was to remove from the base, not remove from the base. Like it wasn't close to base, it was remove everything from the base. So I'm confused.
If that's the case, so they have two examples of abuse,
Okay.
right? There's the possibility of removal from the base, which allows for redeployment in other places, but then there's also the possibility of closing the base and leaving the people there.
Okay.
Because the only argument you have to answer their potential for abuse is your interpretation of presence as the base, not the people, and then you say in means under the auspices of or whatever it is, Djibouti, and you say since it's the only base, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
And their argument counters that at two levels. It says, well, one, in answering the plan, no, because that leads to deployment elsewhere. Two, in answering your counterinterpretation that says it is the base and therefore for regional specificity or whatever, that ain't good enough because you could still leave the people there, but the base would be closed.
Okay. So on the first one, if our argument is about like how you need to link it to scholarship, which it seems like you grant us, but you think the T argument outweighs, then the argument that we make is that when you remove from the base, because of the like destruction of like the field stasis course, there is no means as to which you can redeploy into other spaces. Which
That
would
would
be
be
simultaneous with closing the base also, because we wouldn't leave like the troops. We wouldn't leave the troops. One, our plan is an MK closing, but two, we wouldn't leave troops there if the plan isn't if the 1AC is affirmed, because our argument is that no military presence should exist there. Period. So I don't understand like how. I guess could you explain how they win the first one?
Well, that scholarship question seems to be, again, the scholarship question as you explain it, which says we won't answer disads in that way, that's the way I understand it is in the context of reasonability. Unless you're trying to make a separate argument that is to say, yeah, I don't understand how that's a relevant question for topicality unless it's under the auspices of reasonability, which is to say we won't do what you said because we've taken a clear stance against redeployment. And that's how I understood it.
Yeah.
So if you meant something else, I didn't
No, I understand what you're
get
saying.
it.
You're
Yeah.
understanding in the context of reasonability.
Right. That's the only way that I saw that, because it's kind of like saying it's a no abuse argument. It's like
that
we
makes
won't
sense.
do that, we didn't do that, we'd never do that.
That makes
We
sense.
make a strong statement against it here.
So what about like the counter like analysis of reasonability that we have like an objective like metric? Because their argument of reasonability is that
But
it creates judge bias because it comes from a subjective standpoint. Argument is that there's an objective way of evaluating reasonability because they should evaluate the amount of disads they have access to. And
you say links to disads as the objective standard, but their topical version of the AF solves that just as well. So then I wouldn't have a reason to prefer reasonability other than that it's like reasonable and reasonably objective by one standard. There's just there's nothing to kind of like hang my hat on.
Just to the defensive line?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's nothing to hang my hat on, particularly without a reason why competing interpretations is bad or leads to, whatever, race to the bottom, all of that kind of stuff. Although you'd want probably more than that in some way.
That's right.
Yeah.
JD, can I ask some questions? So do you think the 2NR should have just been T so I could parse out more impact and explain this better?
Well, I mean, I think you'd be better off choosing one or the other. I really do. I mean, I think the other thing that you could do is try to, if you have more time, what you would need to do for the counter plan is to cut them off from application of their evidence in a better way than you did. I mean, the thing that would have still been difficult for me is you all at one level concede their framing of the counter plan as a reframing. They say, well, it's Davis and we're not like the status quo humanitarian and all that stuff. when I read the evidence after the 2AR, I think this evidence actually makes it seem highly unlikely that that kind of reframing is possible in any way, shape, or form. That reframing sounds like bullshit. However, really what I would want is for you to say that reframing is bullshit. There's still the risk of covert ops, which is what who is it? What's the Bachman is talking about. It's still completely consistent with humanitarianism in the status quo conception of it. Here are places where their cards use stability rhetoric, right? As it is right now, you're saying kind of in general, it connects back to the status quo, but I would feel like I would like to have a lot more. The evidence is still strong in that regard. If the 2NR, though, doesn't go for T, only goes for the counterplan and says, listen, none of the arguments in the evidence that could answer the counterplan have ever been advanced specifically in the debate. Don't allow them to say, and then list all of those things. They've never said the word covert. They've never said that we are this. In fact, the only team that's talked about the framing is us. Then, that's a different version of closing the door that's a lot more specific, in which you are anticipating very specific things that the 2AR would need to say. And the reason that that works is because it just makes, it does close the door, but it also makes obvious arguments they're not making. So it's like it's a further attack on their credibility in a sense.
Yeah.
And what, in this case, because the debating was kind of done at a more general level by both sides, I do have the tendency to look at the evidence to see what's supported, and I would have thought, well, yeah, y'all are way ahead in terms of the spin. But as I read the evidence, there are so many sort of obvious answers there that apply to the counterplan. I would have been in a tough, I would have, I don't know what I would have done there,
Yeah.
So that's sort of my suggestion.
How did you evaluate the we solve media spin argument, they don't, because withdrawals get spun as military readiness, but keeping it there doesn't?
Well, that's something, and no doubt you say that, and they don't particularly have an answer. I would still be faced with the question of the impact. So what is the impact of media spin? What portion of the case do they not access because of media spin? And how is that distinct from the counterplan? So,
yeah.
right? Because there's a way in which if they win the impact of the AF, the colonialism impact, or that you are failed state rhetoric, then the counterplan may actually may solve not a lot. Like it's very difficult given that the case impact is kind of a framing question, almost a historical question, and then yours is a more kind of contingent or predictive impact.
Yeah.
If there's a solvency deficit, a big one, for like a framing or historical question, that's tough. So you don't have the judge where you want them to be in terms of evaluating the comparison of those impacts.
Okay.
And so does the media spin argument, you'd want to explain how that implicates the big portion of the AF's impact.
Okay.
Because, again, I still would have, there are just lots of questions in terms of impact comparison that aren't done by either side, even whether or not the successes of demining are just more important. You should have a comparison, which is the risk to which we are what they want to characterize us as is less important than the fact that the counterplan is able to resolve these kinds of issues. And their arguments assume the status quo, not the reframing that we are garnering via our concession of the Davis evidence, etc. I mean, you're doing some of it, but not really.
That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about the decision, but just
Yeah, sure.
in terms of impact. Everyone keeps saying neither of us are doing impact framing, but I guess at least in the 1AR, it's like I was trying to do all the bare life
It's not impact. So you're emphasizing your impact, which is good. But when I say impact framing, I guess maybe what I mean really is impact comparison, because you need to argue that in a more predictive way, I would say, how the setup of the counterplan or its language is open to exploitation, reappropriation, and use your evidence to do that. So for instance, you have a huge impact, which is colonialism and what it does to people. But colonialism is not just one thing. It's actually a lot of things that operates in a lot of ways. And if you read your Bachman evidence, it says, you know, there's all kinds of stuff that it talks about. Even just in the relationship to troops in the Horn of Africa. So citing those as examples, those are all feed back into your big impact of colonialism, but they're also all distinct things. They're all distinct impacts happening to different people, different groups of people, different times and places. And so by getting some of the specificity of your impact back, then you have more to compare against whatever little specific impact they want to hold up. That's what I mean. And so for them, I'm saying they need to say, you know, the humanitarian thing, I wouldn't call it the humanitarian thing, but the demining thing is this many people, it's real, it can be solved, it's worth it, even if U.S. troops are bastards, we should, you know, do this, right? Even if they're, whatever. And that then they're making some kind of comparative claim against the fear that it just is another inroad back into the same old system of colonialism. So you've got to have your big framing devices about the impact, but then the more you can make it kind of specific within that, you're going to have a lot more stuff going on that creates different kinds of solvency deficits or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, good debate.
Are you gonna